it's Davey from Endlessly He Said. It's been a long time since I made a YouTube video, and I thought I would join with my friend Pete and talk about our top 10 albums of 2021. We're going to discuss 10 records each, and I don't think there's much overlap. And I'm going to let my friend Pete go first. Pete, do you want to just tell us a little bit about you and why I've asked you to do this?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Pete. I'm Davey's friend, if you hadn't gathered that. So Davey and I know each other, what, probably getting on 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, that's
Um,
about right.
but only recently, kind of in the last 2 years, realized that there's a whole lot of overlap in kind of our music tastes and who we are as people. And our friend Lewis, who lived with Davey for a while, kind of almost stapled that friendship. And so, yeah, hung out a lot over the last year, and I think that's probably the reason you asked me to do it. Could be wrong though.
Yeah, we're both avid list makers, and I think we're both critical about what we really love. And so that's why I asked Pete to do this, really. And the other thing that I think is that he's got incredible taste. However, I introduced him to horror punk on a different level this year, I think, as he was writing his master's dissertation about horror themes.
Yeah, so I'll start. So number 10 on my list is Silk Sonic, An Evening with Silk Sonic. It's an album recorded by two of my favorite kind of musicians in the last decade, that being Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars. And I'm not going to say much about kind of lower down albums because I've got a lot to say about the higher up albums. But it's just really good kind of throwback 70s funk R&B. It's what James Brown would be making if James Brown was still alive today. And yeah, just really solid album.
I like their record a lot, and yeah, I think for me, Bruno Mars was the standout on that. However, I know Anderson .Paak is probably the fan favorite throughout. I really enjoyed the features and the kind of vibe that they gave. That it was almost like a live record, but not a live record.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's a lot to be said for the features. I don't have the track listing in front of me, but I remember Thundercats on it, and obviously, funk, just legend. Bootsy Collins kind of acts as a narrator across the whole. It's not a concept album, so it's not a storyline, but the kind of he makes the album feel as though it's one, as you say, a performance. It's really well put together.
Nice. I feel like I want to make changes to my list before I get started, but this is dangerous. My number 10 is Dying Wish, Fragments of a Bitter Memory. I described this record as the Hellfest DVD circa 2003, 2004. If anyone's familiar with that metalcore scene out of kind of New England, what was happening around there with, I guess, key bands coming out like Converge or Caden, or that kind of really mushy hardcore with the military hats and the windbreakers. It's that, but done incredibly well with kind of really dark gothic over themes. I think there's a lot to be said about vocals, and I don't want to be the person that says it's got a female vocalist and that sets it apart. However, the lead singer does an incredible job and has a really diverse vocal range, and it makes it stand out. And it is reminiscent of old Walls of Jericho as well. But yeah, it's really moshy, really intense. There's heavy breakdowns. Probably one of the hardest records on my list, and a lot of it is guitar-based music. So yeah, Dying Wish, Fragments of a Bitter Memory.
A note to anyone watching this, you'll notice the main difference between Davey and I here is Davey's actually done his research, so he's got comments to make on my top 10. I didn't, and therefore I am just gonna have to let him talk about those things. But I mean, and I'm probably gonna say this after everyone, but that's definitely, like, from your description. We should have filmed this tomorrow after I'd listened to them all, but yeah, anyway, my number 9 album is Solar Power by Lorde. which I know, Davey, you're not such a fan of.
It didn't hit me as much as I think that the fans had hyped it out to me. And after I gave it another listen when you told me that it was in your list, and yeah, it still didn't hit me as hard as I wanted it to.
Yeah, that's fair. Nostalgia has a huge kind of play in how things affect you and how you remember them. And Lorde, so at the time I was doing my GCSEs and finishing secondary school, Pure Heroine had only just come out, and that album was like just I played it on a loop basically. And so everything she's done since I've kind of maybe paid special attention to. And I enjoy this. Obviously, it's vastly different to the kind of synth pop stuff she's done in the past. I don't rate it as highly as, definitely not as highly as Melodrama. That album's something else. But I really enjoy it when artists take new kind of artistic directions. And so hearing her over what's effectively an indie folk album, really, I really enjoyed it, and I think the songwriting and a lot of her vocal parts are very technically very good, and just seeing her progress as a vocalist I'm really enjoying it.
I will say this of the record. I think it sets a new standard in terms of how a record can be marketed. I noticed that she did pre-orders for an empty box and a digital download of the album just to be carbon neutral. I think the climate change conversation that's going on around that is really interesting. And she's a New Zealand-based artist, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, an important distinction between Australia. And I know that they've definitely got they're going in the right direction with that climate change conversation. So it's interesting that she does that and then brings that around. That's all.
Yeah. I still find that whole empty box pre-order thing absolutely hilarious. Just kind of, it's great for like, as in what it stands for in climate change is great, but it does just kind of also show that people will buy anything, really.
It's true. It's not quite a kiss condom, but it is it's an interesting merchandise ploy, isn't it? That people who have vinyl records and don't listen to them would buy an empty box and play that album on download.
And like, it can't be carbon neutral, right? Because she still has to ship that thing out.
I don't know how she's doing it, to be honest. I'm going to take my number 9 and get back to music. So this is a Solid State Records release from a band called Idle Threat. The album's called Blurred Visions, and they're probably the smallest artist on my list. They're a 3-piece that play post-hardcore vibes, and being in a band myself, this is an album that I wish I could have made. Like, I think from the emotion and the musicianship and just the faith-based themes that come through, it really, really spoke to me. And yeah, it just grabbed me quite a lot. And so, yeah, really stuck out for me in terms of solid state releases, which is something that I'm always got my ear to the ground for what's going on in that scene. But they would have fit around the Cornerstone Festival around sort of 2009 and 2010, around that kind of scene. So if that's familiar for you, then yeah, Idle Threat. Do you enjoy it?
Cool. Yeah. So my number 8 is BackxWash, and I've got the abbreviation written down. Let's see if I can remember this. I lie here buried with my rings and my dresses. I think I got that right.
I think that's right.
BackxWash is a Canadian, but as I say that, it doesn't sound right. But they're a rapper, experimental kind of hip hop artist. This record, harrowing, very, very intense. Almost not a rap record. It's experimental hip hop, not to the kind of crazy Death Grips, basically a grindcore band type experimental hip hop, but it's with kind of Lorde or horror or artists like that. It kind of fits into that vein. Very in your face. Very almost metal in like a lot of the production choices on it. BackxWash is trans, and so a lot of the struggle of the trans artists and trans people in general comes through in this album. It's brutal. It's very, very dark, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I'm glad that that record clocked in at just over half an hour, because for me, when I listened to it, it was really intense. And I think like any good hardcore punk record of maybe the 80s and the 90s, like it wants to be like a short record because it's really short and really intense. But yeah, it was almost too intense to feature that highly on my list. Because to be honest, after a couple of listens, I was like, I'm not sure how much I'm going to revisit this, because you have to be in the right headspace to want to listen to it. It's not been on heavy rotation, but I really did enjoy it.
Yeah, it's as I say, I maybe put a disclaimer on a couple of records on this list, one of which is on both of our lists, but on this one, in that you have to be in the right headspace to listen to this album. If you're not, it's either you're not going to like it, or it's probably going to do some damage. And yeah, I would just say, you know, definitely listen to it, but make sure you're up to listening to it, I guess.
Yeah. It reminds me of a record that's not in my top 10 that that played very highly, and I didn't want to put it in my list, which was Bo Burnham's Inside, which is all just comedy songs. He had a censorship warning at the beginning of that comedy show, just to sort of say, this features themes of suicide and death, and maybe not watch this if you're in the wrong headspace. Anyway, on to slightly happier things, maybe. My number 8 is Turnstile Glow On. Turnstile are a band that I've enjoyed watching live. They came from members of Trapped Under Ice. However, since Non-Stop Feeling, they've released this new record, which sort of marries up that dream punk vibe along with the hardcore punk ethic that they're doing at the same time. They've kind of really layered up what they're doing, and in a lot of ways reminds me of kind of like early Cure in the way that they've kind of really built together. They're still fast-paced, they're still heavy, but they've got this really sort of hazy, like melodic vocal and kind of theme running throughout the record. I mean, the album covers like pink clouds, and so it just looks like candy floss, and I think that's kind of the vibe that they're going for. It's certainly not like angular and in your face like punk can be. But yeah, it is something that I've had on heavy rotation, and the songs are really catchy. For me, my standout track is Holiday, which is just, it's really fun, and you can't not love it.
Yeah, so this one I've not listened all the way through to, but when it came out, it came up in my Spotify radar, and I threw it on while I was doing some work, had it on in the background. And what I heard, I really liked. That kind of, I think you said Dream Punk was a label you gave it. And yeah, that tracks. It's reminded me a bit of kind of like My Bloody Valentine, but they weren't stuck in a vacuum cleaner.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So this is what I heard I enjoyed. I just haven't had the time to go back and give it the attention it deserves just yet.
I think you're number 7.
Yes, Creeper, American Noir. Anyone who's spoken to me at all over the last year knows that out of nowhere, an obsession with Creeper has just kind of developed. I mostly blame Davey for this, actually.
I'm guilty.
But so Creeper are Southampton based. They used to be horror punk, ish, kind of, maybe. Pop punk with horror influences.
I think you would call them an emo band, and I just, the heavy influences here and reference points are My Chemical Romance and AFI. If you talk to Will about the band, that's the two main artists he would cite.
So last year they brought out an album which I think was Davey's album of the year and was my second album of the year. were called Sex, Death, and the Infinite Void, and the EP that's on my list here, American Noir, came out this year. It's kind of offcuts, B-sides, basically songs that didn't quite make the Sex, Death, and the Infinite Void album. It's got some bangers on it. It's got some slow burns, which initially, like One of Us, initially I didn't really like, but have really grown on me. But one thing I do want to kind of shout this album out for, or this EP, I should say, out for, is the track "Ghosts Over Calvary," which so Creeper have like a two vocalist situation. Will Gold, who sings, is it Gould?
Will Gould, I think, yeah, he plays on his name because it's like Gould, but yeah, Gould.
But anyway, him who like sings a lot of the lead, and then they've got Hannah who she plays keys, but she also does a lot of backing vocals, and more recently a lot of lead vocals on tracks as well. And there are two tracks, Damned and Doomed and Ghosts Over Calvary, on this, and they're just really good. And it's nice to hear her take more of a lead. I actually this is fresh in my mind because I actually saw Creeper in London last night, and the songs they played off of this album, this EP, which were Midnight, Ghosts Over Calvary, and Damned and Doomed, were just incredible. It's a good listen, and it's only like 15 minutes long, so I like that it's not like, it doesn't outstay its welcome.
This is sitting on the side of my list without a rating next to it because it's I didn't know how I felt about EPs, but I think you've talked all about it in every which way, so I don't want to rain on your parade with that, and I'm just going to let you do that. So thank you. My number 7 is Every Time I Die, Radical. I have been a fan of Every Time I Die for a long time. However, since Hot Damn, I would say that nothing has really hit me that hard. Like they've been a band that I've always watched live and enjoyed. I saw them a few years ago and really enjoy them live. However, their more recent records just haven't hit me and haven't like appeared in my end of year lists. And so to that extent, I think it's a real credit to this record. The singles that came out were like really, really engaging. And I think they deployed it in just the right way because it almost comes out as like a double LP. I think that's what they were touting it as. But for me, the real standout is just the collaboration that runs through the record. They've got features with 68, which is Josh Gogan of The Chariot, which just reminds me of The Chariot. And Every Time I Die would be perfect counterparts to have them together. However, there's also features with like Andy from Manchester Orchestra. And I think just having this really, really big mix of like their kind of jarring, chaotic, hardcore punk, and then also these like slower moments throughout the record. It's quite typical to say that kind of thing of a punk band evolving, but they do it so very well. And I think the flag that they fly and the world that they live in hardcore punk is brilliant to have. And real credit to Andy in the band who plays guitar, but he's also like a pro wrestler. And then Keith, who's also a writer. And I think they just marry everything together really well. They've continued to put out good music and create a community around them as well, which is lovely to see. Your number 6?
My 6?
Your 6.
So my number 6 is, and this is embarrassing, there are 2 Will Gould albums or EPs back to back here, but Salem II by Salem. Salem are, I think it's fair to say they are a horror punk band.
Yeah, that's accurate. Definitely for Salem.
I read somewhere, or someone, a tweet maybe, that basically Salem are what Misfits would have been writing if Danzig was terminally horny, and that kind of works as a description.
I mean, I think Danzig's pretty sexual anyway. You just have to look at his music videos to see that, but I guess maybe not so much in the Misfits.
But it's 5 songs long. I think it's short, it's sweet, well written, well produced, and just kind of a lot of fun. Davey and I saw Salem live in Birmingham in October, and it was just a really good show. And I think, once again, similar to the Creeper one, it's nice and short, 15 minutes, doesn't outstay its welcome at all.
Absolutely, yeah. I love Salem. They reminded me of when Creeper first started, and I think that's what Will really wanted to capture as Creeper were evolving. They became kind of something else. They're a lot more grandiose, but I think it's quite comforting having a punk band to go back to and know that you're going to play fast songs that haven't got much like slow burn or ballads in there as well. And yeah, I want to shout out Matt from Howard's Alias previously, who plays guitar on this thing. So Howard Alias were a band that I grew up with in sort of the late 90s, turn of the century. And when I was going to gigs in like community centres, they would be one of the household name records bands that I'd go and see. So it's nice to see someone sort of your own age or a couple of years older now still playing music. So yeah, shout out Matt Zero. My number 6, Lingua Ignota, Sinner Get Ready. I'm not sure where this features on Pete's list, but I think it's on his list. And
it is. It's number 4 on my list. So do you want to talk about this now or talk about it then?
I think we'll talk about it at number 6, and then we'll mention that it's your number 4. Cool. So Pete's introduced me to Lingua Ignota completely. Like, I saw his shirt, I saw people talking about her, and I thought, wow, okay, don't know if I get this. And then went into this pretty blind, just expecting kind of experimental, noisy music. And then it wasn't that at all. And so I was really thrown. And so went back around and listened to it again because I just didn't know what to listen to. But on the second listen, I was like, oh, this is the saddest part of like Amanda Palmer when she was writing music on her own, with just sort of piano driven, really overt themes of like kind of crisis and not knowing what to do with yourself. But the bigger thing for this is, of my list, this is probably like the most Christian record. Yeah, I don't know if you consider her a Christian artist. But the religious themes that run through this thing are really, really heavy. And I think the sampling that she uses of some questionable preachers within the church as well really highlights kind of the issues that go on. I think, Pete, I'd love for you to talk a bit more about this as well. Just I think more about like what's happened since the record's come out, because she's there was this whole thing about like an abusive ex-partner, which I assume the record is about. Can you shine a bit more light on that?
Yeah. So, well, I'm not going to claim to be like an authority on this, but from my understanding, so Kristen Hayter, who is Lingua Ignota, I can never pronounce the last word, but you know, was in a relationship with Alexis from the band Daughters, and he just was not a good person to her, from what I can understand. She released a very lengthy statement. Go read that if you're curious. Do not read that if you are triggered by kind of sexual abuse or anything along those lines. But it's not a good situation. And yeah, I believe this album is her, and in fact the album before this, Caligula, I believe they are her kind of trying to rationalize and work through the awful things that have happened to her through her music, which leads to, especially on Sinner Get Ready, some of the most devastatingly emotional kind of musical moments I think I've ever heard. There's one on He Who Bends the Tall Grasses, where she's just like shouting out to God to basically kill this person, and it is just gut-wrenching. It is brutal, and at the same time it is cathartic and beautiful. I adore this album. I'm just really sad that it's come around under such horrible circumstances, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot of pain, and like it is really, really intense, but never does kind of the musicality of it or the instrumentation kind of take that tone that Caligula did. It always remains like piano driven, or there's layered strings throughout some of it. Like, the thing that caught me really off guard is that there's just not that much percussion throughout the entire thing whatsoever. I just didn't know where to place that. I wasn't expecting it to be just piano driven, but the instrument on its own is incredible. And yeah, I'd love to see her do some of these songs live. I'm sure they're really challenging for her to perform, but yeah.
So I was supposed to see her live this year at Primavera in Barcelona.
Oh wow, yeah.
And then the whole thing got canned because of COVID, and it was just horrible. But one thing I want to say about this album is I was very, very surprised by it, having loved Caligula so much. And so Caligula, as I'm sure you know, is very abrasive. It uses a lot of kind of power electronics and almost black metal production, and it's very kind of in your face. And this album is not that, really. It's very Hater grew up, I don't know if she grew up, but she was definitely spent time in a Catholic church, and that kind of Catholic like worship music, I feel like that influence really shines through on this, on Sinner Get Ready.
Yeah, it's got that, absolutely, those kind of like archaic sort of Catholic Christian guilt themes that run throughout. And yeah, it makes a really good case for how abusive like that relationship was, and also how abusive the church can be as well. As a Christian and a critic of the church, it's challenging to hear, but wholly accurate in its place. I'm going to hand you over to your number 6. And have we done your number 6?
Yeah, my number 6 was Salem. This is my number 5.
Your number 5. Okay.
Yes.
We'll go around.
It's a bit of a cheat, this one, as it's not actually technically an album that was released this year. But it also is. It is Red, Taylor's version by Taylor Swift.
I think that's fair. It was released this year, not originally, but then the re-recorded music was released this year.
Yeah. So a lot of, like, you wouldn't tell this usually by looking at me, but I am potentially one of the biggest Taylor Swift fans you'll meet. I read, when it came out originally in 2012, is the album that turned me on to pop music, which is a path I've never since looked back on. But just hearing it re-recorded, it's nice. The production is good. I feel as though maybe that this would have featured higher on my list, but I feel like some of the tracks, like I Knew You Were Trouble, like that's such a 2012 sound with the dubstep, and kind of hearing it re-recorded, it just didn't quite have the same edge. But what I really do want to kind of talk about is from the Vault tracks, which were previously unreleased, and it's just really nice hearing kind of, I guess, like time capsules, you might call them, of like what Taylor Swift was writing and doing outside of her albums at the time, and just hearing them released and recorded. And I really want to shout out the absolutely just stunning 10-minute version of All Too Well, which closes out this album. I think at a push, I would actually have to say that was my song of the year. I've got a lot of love for this album, but I've spoken a lot already, so I'm gonna not say so much about it.
That's okay. It was the longest in track length ever #1 song, I think, is what the album, the Billboard charts have quantified it as. The Phoebe Bridgers feature on this like blew me away. I'm a big Phoebe fan. I'm a very big Taylor fan. This features on my list, but I was in two minds about whether I should have put it on my list, given that it is a re-recorded music. And I also felt the same about Fearless, which she also re-released this year. So yeah, it's really good. And I think for her as an artist and for being in such a good place emotionally and with her relationships as well, it's really refreshing to see her re-record this music. One record that she features on that didn't, it was my number 11, was Aaron Dessner's Big Red Machine, which is all of her collaborators just making a record together. And yeah, so you get the Dessner brothers from The National and Bon Iver, and then Taylor Swift's on it as well. So yeah, it's nice hearing her collaborators come through on these, like from the Vault tracks, and then also as she's making that new music as well. But yeah, Red is a classic. My number 5, I think, yes, is Thrice, Horizons/East. I learned after it was released that apparently this is one of 2 parts. Apparently there's Horizons West that's due out at some point in the future. But this caught me at a time in my life when it just really hit hard, and it sounds like the sun coming up. And I've spent a lot of this year doing really long commutes and watching the sun come up from buses and trains and even on my bike. And I've always been a big fan of Thrice and Dustin Kensrue and the band and the music that they make. But they continue to make consistently good records. And I think since they've not kind of stopped, they've not like reinvented themselves or anything, they've just continued to make good music. But this is lengthy. I think the one thing that I want to shout out about this record is the production of it. It really shows what you can do without sort of traditional pedals and amps, because Dustin recorded this whole thing through a quad cortex to do his guitar. And I think we live in a world of digital effects, and the sounds that he makes and what comes out of that is just, it's astonishing. And so, yeah, I would really recommend this. It's not an easy listen because it's still guitar based, like post-hardcore, but it's a good listen if you're into like guitar based music and you want something that's different, that's like out of that world. They're one of the last bands I got to see before everything got shut down, because I saw them with Refused, and yeah, always a joy to watch them live. And I hope that they tour this record in the UK at some point, so I get to see these songs played live as well. Yeah.
Well, my number 4 is Sinner Get Ready. So we've already spoken about that. So do you want to go on to your number 4?
Yeah, this is a lot of me talking. So before I go to number 4, I've got this record that's just at the side. So I'm just going to shout it out and say The Devil Wears Prada Z2 was released this year. It's my favorite EP of the year. It's a zombie-themed metalcore EP. I had the joy of watching a live stream with it, and it's incredible. And they've sold so many copies of it in vinyl, and producing a 10-inch record in 2021 has been a bit of a challenge. So yeah, shout out that. My actual number 4 record is Ghetts, Conflict of Interest. For anyone who knows me, I really do enjoy grime. And this is my favorite like rap, grime, hip hop adjacent record of the year. Ghetts is an artist from East London, affiliated with people like Kano and Giggs. Grew up in that same crew of like Pirate Radio, and his flows are incredible. He doesn't ever miss a beat, and I was sort of re-highlighted with the track that he did with Kano, where they were sort of passing the mic between each other and finishing each other's bars. And I just thought, look, I need to sit down and give this a proper listen. But it's essentially an autobiography of his life, and that's what the opening track is like. I think it's called Fine Wine or something, and it just tells his story about misguided relationships, about growing up, about being young and black in the UK, and then sort of relationship breakdowns as well. The standout track for me is the track with Skepta as one of the features. It's called IC3. It's about racial profiling from the police, and it's really catchy. It's a banger, and yeah, it just caught me completely off guard. I think to not forget that Black lives still matter, and that in the wake of of that and still George Floyd and other Black people getting killed every day, that it's important that politically charged music, especially made by like proud Black British artists, is relevant still today. It's an hour long, so it's a proper album. It's definitely not sort of just throwaway singles by any means. Like, so it's one of these records that listening to in one sitting front to back is wholly relevant. But I would really recommend this, to sit down and listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is following on for what you were saying. Like, it's important to make sure that you don't, when consuming art, that you don't fall into like, and I was guilty of this when I was in my thrash kid phase, where I was like, all the artists I listened to were white straight men, and that it's fine to listen to music from them, but like realize that it's also they are the people for whom it is easiest to make a living, make music, and like try to support others. And like I guarantee you that for every genre there is a Black artist you haven't heard of that is better than anything you've heard, or a gay artist, or just seek it out because it's out there and it's good.
Your number 3.
Okay, so this is, I'd say this is the most mainstream album in my list, and it's Sour by Olivia Rodrigo. I really like this album. I think it's really well written pop music. It's very guitar driven, which I like to hear. It's reminiscent of kind of what Avril Lavigne was doing, like not as kind of punky as what she was doing, but it's like I would say that Olivia Rodrigo is to kids now what Avril Lavigne was to us when we were their age.
I think that's fair. I think completely adjacent to Avril Lavigne. Yeah.
But it's a well written album. It's definitely a breakup album. It's got some, your standard kind of requisite piano driven, I'm really sad that my boyfriend left me songs, but it's also got some really kind of upbeat, almost pop punk songs like Good For You. And it's short, which I'm realizing as I talk more is just something I really like in albums. It's about 35 minutes long. It's an easy listen. I really like it.
I really like this record too. It didn't sit that highly in my list. It just hits like Paramore. And I know there's this whole, I don't know if they've been taken off now, but there was some like writing credits or like chord progressions that they were getting credit for. It's interesting having that in a modern world where kind of everything's been written and everything's been done, but it hits really well. Like it reminds me of Hayley Williams at 15, watching her do the Paramore thing. And yeah, it's really angsty and I really enjoy it. I think it says a lot about young musicians wanting to make a living and doing it in a creative way, because I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, I think she got big on TikTok just doing music and then kind of made a living, and this is the best-selling record of the year, I think.
I mean, I think she's 19, she may even be younger than that, and she sold out 3 nights at Hammersmith next year, which is the dream for a lot of people, so she's doing well. And she did get big off of TikTok, or if she didn't get big on TikTok, I think Driver's License, which was the first single off of this thing, really did take off on TikTok, and that's kind of TikTok was involved somewhere, basically.
I'm 35 and don't know what I'm talking about. My number 3 is Silent Planet, Iridescent. I'm a big Silent Planet fan, have been for a long time. They get their name from C.S. Lewis reference, and their lyrics are often very poetic and confusing and convoluted. However, Garrett had a breakdown and while he was touring, and made a very, very, very honest, lyrically honest written record, and this comes over. So it's not got deep research and lots of references going across the record, but it speaks about mental health struggles with suicide, struggles with perhaps addiction, whether that's not necessarily to cigarettes, alcohol, or whatever, but like addiction to social media, I know was like a really big part of this. But it had been a long time coming. Like the single trilogy had come out over a year, maybe 2 years before this record had dropped. And so it had been building and building and building. But as they were sort of recording the last parts of the record, like he'd finished recovery, because he went to go and get recovery from his addictions, and this completely comes out. I think the really standout thing for me is that how they can portray. They've got a track called Liminal, which is like the space in between. Is it the space in between like heaven and earth or something? Or it's kind of like that space in between sleep and awake. But it's a really interesting concept, and I said it's like quite an honest record, but that like portrays it really well, having these really slow passages and then going into something called like Terminal as a track, which is like just really traditional Silent Planet, really abrasive. For me, they are one of the best modern metalcore bands that are out there. I think the musicianship that goes through this band is incredible, and Garrett's vocal performances will continue to be some of my absolute favorites.
Yeah, I've not listened to this, but I have listened to Silent Planet a lot in the past. I saw him live. I think maybe you were at that show as well with
Nearly always.
Boy and Comrades back in like 2017.
Oh, I wasn't at that show, but I'd seen them. No, maybe I was. I'd seen them like headline or play with, was it Stick to Your Guns? And that was after I put them on. And that was maybe 2017 or 18. I think it was off the album before this, off that tour.
I think it might be right that you might not have been at the one I was at, because I believe that was around the time your daughter was born.
Yeah, that would have been 2018 in October, so that would have made sense.
Yeah, so, but it's a really good show. They're a really good band. And, you know, if this album is anything like the last 2 or 3 they've released, then it's going to be a very good listen.
Yeah, it's different, but dare I say it, better. But yeah. Your number 2.
My number 2 is If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power by Halsey. This is a album that was produced by Trent Reznor, which I think is the best way to kind of introduce that. It's a concept album Halsey had written during her pregnancy, about the kind of joys, she said herself, the joys and horrors that being pregnant entails. And so it's a lot of very well written songs that are obviously very personal to her, that then just sound like Nine Inch Nails songs, which is great. Actually this year, Davey again got me into Nine Inch Nails in a big way. He doesn't know he did, but I think we had a throwaway conversation about the Downward Spiral, and that set me off on one for the rest of the year.
You're welcome.
But this album, it's very well produced. It has a lot of interesting sounds and techniques that you wouldn't necessarily hear on a pop album. One that comes to mind is there's a lot of breakbeats on the song "Girl Is a Gun." It's very cohesive as well, in that like it's easy to listen to as an album. Like it doesn't sound like a lot of pop albums might sound, where you've got your 3 big singles and then everything else is kind of filler. It's a really good album, really well produced, and I like it. I'm sure you've got opinions on this as well.
I do. Again, it's about in my top 20. It's a record I really, really enjoyed, and it is because Trent Reznor, I don't know if that's because Ross had part in producing this as well, but certainly Trent did. And you hear it all over the production. The track "I'm Not a Woman, I'm a God," like it just sounds like something off of With Teeth. And I think that kind of like modular synth, like those like easy chord progressions that still like have that twinkly bit over the top, absolutely love it. And it's really refreshing to hear Trent doing pop music in terms of production away from his soundtrack work. But also I think for Halsey is such a standout moment. This has probably my favorite cover art of the year, which is her cradling her child with her breast exposed on a throne that looks like Game of Thrones. Completely mad, but like in such a good way, such a powerful like and provoking image. And I think for someone who would be experiencing motherhood for the first time, and then to be able to write about it with like such cohesiveness and to make it relatable, like for women, and to give men a bit of a slap in the face to sort of understand like that power struggle and that women's struggle being pregnant and struggling is it's really refreshing. And a great pop record, and I'm sure the performances as she goes out and she tours this will be incredible as well. I think she's one of the headliners at the Reading and Leeds Festival next year in the UK. So
same day as Rage Against the Machine.
I know,
a day ticket for that,
and Run the Jewels. So
yes,
yeah.
But going back to what you were saying about the artwork, just quickly, it's based on kind of classical portraits of the Virgin Mary, or the Madonna as it is. And I don't know if that's the same person. I may have just...
It is. You've not made that up.
Because my theologist threads are about to come to my throat there. But yeah, it's based on classical portraits. One particular one, I can't remember the artist, but of the Madonna, which just adds, I think, a whole other level to it. So it's pretty cool.
We're coming into land. My number 2 is Zayo, the Crimson Corridor. You didn't like this, and I'm not upset about it, but I get it. I told Pete to listen to this record because I knew it featured so highly in my listing. And I've gone over this record and kind of reanalyzed it and said, does this deserve the spot in my listing? And yeah, it absolutely does. Zayo for me are a band that I got introduced to in the early 2000s. Funeral of God was my gateway for them. And Dan Wyman and his vocals are very polarizing. He took a lot of inspiration from sort of Carcass and sort of these sort of thrashy death metal vocals, because it is really raspy in your face. But the thing for me about this is just like how Zayo have taken on this whole other level of doing like progressive metalcore in a way that just like grabs you and takes you on a journey. And I think there's a lot to be said about artists that can kind of take you to another place when music does that. And for me, this hits in that way. It's about an hour long. And again, I think we've got a main difference here in that a lot of my records are quite long and Pete's are quite short because they're EPs or they're just short albums. But yeah, this one is a big body of work and I think deserves the respect it's due. So you should listen to it as a whole. But yeah, Zayo, the Crimson Corridor.
And I will say, I didn't hate it. It's not maybe something I would seek out to listen to, but I can see the value in it. Some of the riffs on it are very heavy, and I did enjoy them. I think the main turn-off for me was just... So I don't mind the vocal style. I mean, as you know, I'm a huge fan of Carcass, and so... but it's just, for me, the vocals... For me, if I'm listening to that kind of riff and that kind of almost post-hardcore-ish music, those aren't the vocals I'm expecting or perhaps wanting to hear over it. But I would say definitely also listen to this record because if nothing else, you can call me an idiot if you like it. So added bonus, I guess.
It's all right. Now you get the privilege of going to your number 1 record.
Before we do this, have you got any kind of honorable mentions or...
So hardcore records that I've loved this year, a record by a band called One Step Closer, I really enjoyed. rap records that I really enjoy when we're talking about Black artists is Little Simz record, Sometimes I'm Introvert, or I Might Be Introvert. I think for a narrative and for that kind of music is sensational. I really love that. Let me think. And yeah, an EP that didn't feature that highly on my list. Well, no, it featured quite highly on my list, but I just was a bit unsure about EPs. Was the released by Bloodlines called Hevel. They're a Christian band on Face Down Records, and for a band doing Christian hardcore in 2021, I think is really brave. And also, it just kicks ass for making that kind of music, and it's so obviously Christian, and that really engaged me. What about you?
Yeah, I've got a couple I want to shout out. Miss Vincent with A Funeral for Youth. I really enjoyed that album. ABBA's new album I quite enjoyed.
Wow. I really enjoyed Adele's record. Yeah, I thought for pop music that was really quite up there. She did well.
Architects with For Those That Wish to Exist I quite enjoyed as well.
See, my wife would be kicking me if I hadn't have mentioned this record in this video, because I think that's probably her number one. Another band, an album that reminded me of that was another UK band that you saw last night, I hope, called Holding Absence, that released The Greatest Mistake of My Life. Were they good live?
They were very good live.
Yeah, that record is next level. Like doing that kind of UK post-hardcore, reminiscent of like Funeral for a Friend. So good. Yeah, it's quite high up my list.
And one last just honorable mention for me was Error by Error, ERRA.
Loved it. Really, really good metalcore. Is it Gunblade or something?
Gunblood, I think.
Gunblood. The start of that song, there's a stupid YouTube video of a guy playing the drums with guns, and it just reminds me of that. Yeah, it's next level. Okay, Pete, what's your number one?
My number one album of this year is Welcome to Horrorwood by Ice Nine Kills. Ice Nine Kills are an American metalcore, I guess, band. They are very, very well read, I would say, and their albums. So their last two albums, which are Welcome to Horrorwood and The Silver Scream, they're kind of sister albums. Welcome to Horrorwood actually has the subtitle The Silver Scream 2. Every song is about a different horror movie, so it checked that box for me straight away. Very, very well written songs, well produced, often quite tongue in cheek as well, which I really like. I really like it when bands don't take themselves too seriously. This was my most anticipated album of the year, I think, when it got announced. The singles, particularly Assault and Batteries, just really kind of caught my attention, and the rest of the album followed through on that. It's got some cracking features as well. The one that kind of sticks out in my head is Corpse Grinder from Cannibal Corpse. Features on the song Take Your Pick. And yeah, it's just a well-written album that, because it's all about horror films, just really I really like it.
You introduced me to the Ice Nine Kills, and when we're talking about horror themed or like goth punk or whatever, it's refreshing to hear an artist do it very differently and be so theatrical and so dramatic with everything that they do. They are a bit seen, and they still remain seen. And I think it's just really brave that they keep that going in 2021, because this came around. I mean, they've been going for quite a long time, like at least a decade or so. And
I think 20 years.
20 years. Yeah, I watched that punk rock MBA video about them. And they used to be a ska band.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they've kept it going, and fair play to them, and now have a cult following, and kind of they are on tour with Motionless in White and Black Veil Brides. Is that right? And they're sitting.
Yeah, I really hope that comes to the UK, man. That's mad.
I don't know if it will, but they are their peers, right? They've kind of got to that level now, and they've worked really hard to get there. I really enjoyed this record. It's different, like, and I'm a big metalcore fan, as my list is probably attested to. But yeah, I love the theatrics on this, and it's really fun. I'm gonna close this out with my favorite record of 2021, which is AFI Bodies. It's no secret that AFI are my favorite band of all time. So again, like Pete, this was my most anticipated record of 2021. As soon as they tease a release, then they have my attention, because I know that it's going to be something different. And I think that's what I've grown to expect from AFI, is that they're never going to make the same record, that they can make similar records, certainly in the middle of their career, but they're never going to make the same record over and over again. And for me, they're always kind of just ahead of the curve with what they're doing in terms of living in a guitar-based music world. And this is essentially I guess a post-punk record, if you have to slap a genre on something like this. However, I don't really want to, because it is all over the place. There are just punk rock songs on it. There's quite sort of jarring electrical songs on here as well. And then there's songs that are just, they sit around that kind of like bass-led sort of New Order kind of style. For me, the standout performances on this are from like the bassist Hunter. I think he really, really sells this record. And obviously Davey's vocal performance. Again, it's another record like Dan Wyman from Zayo is like, Davey's vocals are very polarizing, and it's, you either love it or you hate it. And so, yeah, for me, I love it. And yeah, it's a short record. It's not too long, and they've made some long records, but this fits on a single LP, and it comes in about 30 something minutes. So yeah, AFI Bodies. I think I have this on 3 different versions of vinyl, and will continue to. There's absolute geekery about this band, and every time they try and tour, it always feels like it's been way too long. And so 2016 was the last time I saw them, and I can guarantee it won't be until at least 2022, 23 that I get to see them again. But yeah, AFI Bodies, would recommend it. Even if you're harping on and saying it doesn't sound like their old stuff, they haven't sounded like their old stuff for about 20 years now. So
I feel as though that was aimed directly at me.
I'm sorry. It's just aimed directly at anyone that wants them to make The Art of Drowning or Black Sails again, because they're incredible records, and just, they don't need to be made again, in my opinion. I think we're done. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think so. This is going to be a very long video.
Yeah, we've been talking for about an hour. So thank you for sitting through this video. If you watch the whole damn thing, we'll put a list of the records in the comments below, and links to other stuff if we've talked about it, maybe like statements and whatever we can work out in the post. But yeah, thank you for watching this. If you were engaged in this YouTube channel before and have sat through an hour of me talking to my friend, then what a treat. But I hope you have a better 2022 than 2021 was, and here's to more good music. Bye.